The night was quiet. Too quiet for a Friday evening in late October. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. The hum of the car engine. The soft buzz of the radio playing old soul music. The gentle whoosh of tires rolling over wet pavement. Denise Walker was tired. Not just regular tired. The kind of tired that settles deep into your bones after 12 straight hours on your feet. She had just finished another brutal shift at the Veterans Hospital downtown, where she worked as a trauma nurse. It was the kind of job that asked everything from you and then asked for a little more. Tonight had been especially hard. A young soldier, barely 22 years old, had come in after a suicide attempt. She had held his hand while the doctors worked. She had called his mother. She had stayed an extra 2 hours just to make sure he was stable before she left. That was the kind of person Denise was. She gave more than she had to give. Now all she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and maybe call her sister before falling asleep on the couch. Simple things. The small comforts that kept her going. Denise was 36 years old, with kind eyes and strong hands. She kept her hair in neat braids that fell just past her shoulders. She dressed simply, usually in scrubs or jeans and a plain t-shirt. Nothing flashy. Nothing that drew attention. That was how she liked it. But there was something about Denise that most people would never guess just by looking at her. Something she rarely talked about, even with close friends. For 8 years before becoming a nurse, she had served in the United States Navy, and not just any role. She had been one of the first women to complete the legendary SEAL training program. One of the toughest military programs in the entire world. She had crawled through mud in freezing temperatures. She had swum miles in open ocean at night. She had been pushed past every limit she thought she had, and then pushed some more. She had served 3 tours in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had earned medals that now sat in a shoebox in her closet, because she was never the type to show them off. When people asked why she left the military, she always gave the same answer. She said she wanted to keep helping people, but in a different way. She wanted to heal instead of fight. She wanted to save lives in hospital beds instead of on battlefields. The truth was a little more complicated than that. The truth always is. Denise had seen things that changed her. Things that visited her in dreams sometimes. Things she had learned to live with but never quite forgot. The military had made her strong in ways most people could not understand. It had also shown her the cost of violence, even when that violence was necessary. So she had traded her combat gear for scrubs. She had traded her weapon for a stethoscope, and she had built a quiet life for herself in this small city, far from the chaos of her past. Tonight, driving down this empty highway, she was just a tired nurse heading home. Nothing more, nothing less. The road stretched out ahead of her like a dark ribbon. There were no other cars in sight, just the glow of her headlights cutting through the misty air. She thought about what she might eat for dinner. Maybe leftover pasta from 2 nights ago. Maybe just some toast and tea. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had skipped lunch again. That was when she saw the lights in her rearview mirror, red and blue, flashing bright against the darkness. A police car coming up fast behind her. Denise felt her stomach tighten, but she kept calm. She always kept calm. That was one thing the Navy had taught her well. Panic helps no one. Stay steady. Assess the situation. Respond with clear thinking. She checked her speedometer. She was doing exactly 55 in a 55 zone. Not a mile over. Her registration was current. Her license was valid. Her tail lights were working fine because she had checked them just last week. There was no reason for this stop. Still, she did what any law-abiding citizen would do. She put on her turn signal, slowed down gradually, and pulled over to the side of the road. She rolled down her window, turned off her engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel, where they could be clearly seen. This was not her first time being pulled over for no reason. It probably would not be her last. She knew the routine. Stay polite. Stay visible. Do not give anyone an excuse. The police car stopped behind her, its lights still flashing. For a long moment, nothing happened. The officer just sat there in his vehicle. Denise could see his silhouette in her side mirror, but she could not make out his face. 1 minute passed. Then 2, then 3. This was a tactic she recognized. Making someone wait, building tension, establishing dominance before a single word was even spoken. It was meant to make people nervous. It was meant to put them on edge. Denise just breathed slowly and waited. She had waited in far worse situations than this. She had waited in complete darkness with enemies nearby, not knowing if the next second would bring gunfire. A traffic stop on a quiet highway was nothing compared to that. Finally, the car door opened. Heavy footsteps approached on the gravel shoulder. The officer who appeared at her window was a tall man with a thick neck and small eyes. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, but there was something in his expression that Denise did not like. A certain look, a certain energy. Like he had already decided something about her before he even reached her car. She had seen that look before. Too many times. "License and registration," he said. No greeting, no explanation. Just a flat demand. "Good evening, officer," Denise replied, keeping her voice calm and respectful. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" The officer's jaw tightened. "I said license and registration." Denise nodded slowly. "Of course. I'm going to reach into my glove compartment now to get my registration. Is that okay?" She always announced her movements. Always made sure there were no misunderstandings. She had learned long ago that misunderstandings in situations like this could cost you everything. The officer did not answer. He just stared at her with those small, hard eyes. Denise reached over slowly, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out her registration papers. Then she reached into her purse on the passenger seat and retrieved her wallet. She handed both her license and registration through the window. The officer snatched them from her hand without a word. He looked at her license, then looked at her, then looked at the license again. Like he was searching for something wrong. Like he wanted to find a problem. "This your current address?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Where are you coming from tonight?" "Work. I'm a nurse at the VA hospital." He made a sound that might have been a grunt or might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell. "Nurse, huh? Working late?" "Yes, sir. Long shift." The officer looked at her car. It was nothing special. A 10-year-old sedan with a small dent in the back bumper. Clean inside and out because Denise liked to keep things tidy. "Step out of the vehicle," he said suddenly. Denise felt her heart beat a little faster, but her face showed nothing. "May I ask why, officer? Have I done something wrong?" The officer leaned closer to her window. Close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. Close enough that she could see the anger building in his eyes. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." And in that moment, Denise knew that this night was about to become something very different from what she had planned. Denise took a slow breath. She had been trained to stay calm in situations that would make most people fall apart. She had faced enemy fire without flinching. She had made life-or-death decisions in split seconds, but this was different. This was her own country. This was supposed to be home. "Officer," she said, keeping her voice steady and polite, "I would like to understand why I'm being asked to exit my vehicle. I have not been told what I did wrong." The officer's face twisted into something ugly. "You people always got something to say, don't you? Always gotta make things difficult. You people." There it was. 2 words that told her everything she needed to know about what was really happening here. Denise had heard those words before. More times than she could count, in grocery stores, at gas stations. Sometimes from strangers, sometimes from people who should have known better. Each time it felt like a small cut. And small cuts, over time, add up to something much deeper. But she was not going to give this man the reaction he wanted. She was not going to raise her voice or show fear or do anything that could be twisted against her later. She knew how these things worked. She knew that the story could easily become, "Aggressive woman refuses to cooperate with police if she made one wrong move." So she simply nodded. "I understand, officer. I'm going to step out of the car now. I'm going to move slowly." She opened her door carefully and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The night air was cool and damp against her skin. She could hear crickets somewhere in the distance. The flashing lights from the police car painted everything in shades of red and blue. Denise stood with her hands visible at her sides. She was wearing her work clothes. Simple navy blue scrubs, comfortable sneakers, a light jacket against the October chill. Nothing threatening, nothing suspicious. Just a tired nurse on her way home from saving lives. The officer walked around her slowly, looking her up and down like she was a piece of evidence at a crime scene. His hand rested on his belt, near his weapons. His eyes never left her face. "You got any drugs in that car?" he asked. "No, sir." "Weapons?" "No, sir." "You sure about that?" "You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" Denise felt a flash of anger deep in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had learned long ago that anger was a luxury she could not always afford, especially not in moments like this. "I am telling you the truth, officer. I have nothing illegal in my vehicle. I'm a nurse. I'm coming home from work. That's all," the officer snorted. "Nurse, right? And I'm supposed to just believe that?" He stepped closer to her. Too close. Invading her space in a way that was meant to intimidate. She could see the veins in his neck. She could see the way his jaw was clenched tight. "I'm going to search your vehicle," he announced. Denise knew her rights. She knew that. He needed either her consent or probable cause to search her car. She knew that saying no was legal. She also knew that saying no might make this situation much, much worse, but she could not just give in. She could not let this man walk all over her rights just because he had a badge and she had brown skin. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," she said clearly. "I have done nothing wrong. I would like to know the reason for this stop." Something changed in the officer's eyes. A darkness that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly rose up. His face went red, his hands balled into fists. "You think you're smart, huh? You think you know the law better than me?" "I am simply asking for the reason I was stopped, sir." "That is my right. You're right?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you something about rights. Out here on this road, I am the law. You understand me? I decide what rights you have." Denise said nothing. She just stood there, steady as a rock, refusing to be shaken. And somehow, her calmness seemed to make him even angrier. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "Cat got your tongue now? You had plenty to say a minute ago." Still, she did not respond. She had learned in her military training that sometimes silence was the most powerful weapon. Sometimes the best thing you could do was let the other person reveal who they really were. And this officer was revealing plenty. He grabbed her arm suddenly, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "I asked you a question. Please take your hand off me," Denise said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it now. The kind of steel that had been forged in places this man could not even imagine. "Or what?" He squeezed harder. "What are you going to do about it?" And then it happened, without warning, without any reason at all. The officer pulled back his hand and slapped her across the face. Hard. The sound of it echoed in the empty night like a gunshot. Denise's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned. Her ear rang. For a moment the world seemed to stop spinning, but she did not fall. She did not cry out. She did not stumble. She turned her head back slowly and looked directly into his eyes. What the officer saw in that moment must have confused him. Because instead of fear, instead of tears, instead of a woman falling apart, he saw something else entirely. He saw the calm, focused gaze of someone who had faced far worse than him. Someone who had stared down death itself and walked away. He saw a warrior. What Officer Derek Holloway did not know, what he could not possibly know, was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his entire career. And it had all been captured on camera. Denise's personal dashcam, mounted on her dashboard, had been recording from the moment she started her car that evening. It was a habit she had picked up years ago, after hearing too many stories about situations exactly like this one. The camera had a wide-angle lens that caught everything. Every word, every movement. Every second of what this officer had just done. His own body camera was recording too. Standard department policy. He had probably forgotten it was even there. Most officers did when they let their anger take control. So there it was, multiple angles, clear audio. Undeniable proof of what had just happened on this quiet stretch of highway. But in this moment, none of that mattered to Denise. What mattered was the man standing in front of her, his hands still raised, his eyes still full of that ugly hatred. He grabbed the front of her jacket and pulled her toward him. "You think you're tough? Huh? You think you can just stand there and look at me like that?" Denise felt her training kick in. Not the urge to attack. That would come later, if it needed to. First came the assessment, the calculation. The reading of the situation. She noticed his stance was sloppy. His weight was on his heels. His grip on her jacket was strong but poorly positioned. If she wanted to, she could break free in less than a second. She could have him on the ground in 2, but she waited, because she knew that the moment she acted, everything would change. And she needed to be absolutely certain that when she did act, it would be in self-defense. Clear, justified, undeniable self-defense. "I'm not resisting," she said clearly, loudly enough for the cameras to pick up. "I am not being aggressive. I am asking you to please stop hurting me." The officer's response was to raise his hand again, and that was when Denise Walker decided that she had been patient long enough. The officer's hand came swinging toward her face again. But this time, it never landed. Denise moved like water, smooth, fast, precise. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Years of training took over in an instant. She caught his wrist mid-swing. Not with force, but with technique. Her fingers found the exact pressure point she needed. The officer's eyes went wide with shock. He had expected her to cower. He had expected her to cry and beg. He had not expected this before he could even process what was happening. Denise stepped to the side and guided his own momentum against him. It was a simple move, really. One of the first things they teach you in hand-to-hand combat. Use your opponent's energy. Let their aggression become their weakness. The officer stumbled forward, off balance. His free hand reached for his belt, fumbling for something. But Denise was faster. She secured his arm behind his back in a controlled hold. The same hold she had used dozens of times in situations far more dangerous than this one. She applied just enough pressure to keep him still. Not enough to injure. Not enough to cause lasting damage. Just enough to make it very clear that she was in control now. "Do not move," she said. Her voice was calm but firm. The voice of someone who had given orders in the chaos of combat. The voice of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The officer struggled against her grip. He cursed. He threatened. He promised that she would regret this. But no matter how hard he twisted or pulled, he could not break free. It was like being held by a statue made of iron. "Let me go," he shouted. "I'll have you arrested. I'll make sure you never see daylight again." Denise did not respond to his threats. Instead, she spoke clearly into the night air, knowing that both cameras were recording every word. "My name is Denise Walker. I am a former United States Navy SEAL with 8 years of active service. I am currently working as a trauma nurse at the Veterans Hospital. I was pulled over tonight without being given any reason. This officer used a racial comment toward me. He grabbed me without cause. He slapped me across the face without provocation. When he attempted to strike me a second time, I defended myself using the minimum force necessary to prevent further assault." She paused, making sure her words were clear and measured. "I am not resisting arrest. I am not being aggressive. I am holding this officer in a non-harmful restraint to prevent him from continuing to assault me. His body camera is recording. My dash cam is recording. I am requesting backup and a supervisor to this location immediately." The officer had stopped struggling. He was breathing hard, his face pressed against the side of her car. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. He had never encountered anyone like her before. In his entire career of bullying people who could not fight back, he had never once met someone who could turn the tables so completely and so quickly. "You're lying?" he gasped. "There's no way you're a SEAL. Women can't be SEALs." "I was one of the first," Denise replied simply. "And right now, I am the woman who is going to hold you here until someone with authority arrives." You can continue to struggle if you want. It won't change anything. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. The night was still around them, broken only by the continued flashing of the police car's lights and the distant sound of traffic on a faraway road. Then headlights appeared in the distance. A car was approaching. Denise watched carefully as the vehicle slowed down. It was a pickup truck, old and dusty. The driver, a middle-aged man with a gray beard, pulled over about 50 feet away. He stepped out slowly, his phone already in his hand. "What in the world is going on here?" he called out. "Please stay back, sir," Denise said. "This is a situation involving law enforcement. I have this officer restrained because he assaulted me. I would appreciate it if you could call 911 and request additional officers and a supervisor." The man's eyes went wide as he took in the scene. A woman in scrubs holding a police officer pinned against a car. It was not something you saw every day, but to his credit, he did not panic. He did not try to interfere. He simply nodded and raised his phone. "I'm going to record this too," he said. "And I'm calling for help right now." "Thank you," Denise replied. "Please also note the time and location for your records." More minutes passed. The officer had gone quiet now. His earlier rage had burned itself out, leaving behind something hollow. Maybe he was starting to realize what he had done. Maybe he was starting to understand that his career, his freedom, his entire life was about to change because of the choices he had made tonight, or maybe he was just tired. It was hard to tell. Finally, more lights appeared on the highway. 2 police cars approaching fast. They pulled up to the scene with their sirens briefly wailing before going silent. The doors opened, and 3 officers stepped out. 2 men and 1 woman. They approached with their hands on their weapons, their eyes darting between Denise and their colleague. "What's going on here?" One of them demanded. "Officers, my name is Denise Walker. I'm going to release your colleague now and step back with my hands raised. I want to explain that I am the victim in this situation, not the aggressor. Everything has been recorded on multiple cameras." She released the officer slowly and took 3 steps backward, her hands clearly visible above her head. The officer stumbled away from her, rubbing his arm and glaring with pure hatred in his eyes. "She attacked me," he shouted immediately. "She's crazy. Arrest her." One of the newly arrived officers, a woman with sergeant stripes on her sleeve, held up a hand. "Everyone calm down. Let's figure out what happened here." The man with the pickup truck stepped forward. "I saw the whole thing, officer. Well, not the whole thing, but I've been recording for the past few minutes." "And that lady there, she said the cop hit her first." "She was just defending herself." The sergeant's eyes moved to Denise. There was something in her expression. Not hostility, but careful evaluation. Like she was trying to read the situation before making any judgments. "Man, you said there's dashcam footage?" "Yes, Sergeant. My personal dashcam has been recording since I started my car this evening. It captured everything from the moment I was pulled over. Additionally, your officer's body camera should have recorded the entire encounter from his perspective." The sergeant nodded slowly. She looked at her colleague, the one who had been held against the car. His face was red. His uniform was disheveled. But more than that, there was guilt written all over him. The kind of guilt that comes when you know you have been caught doing something terrible. "Holloway," the sergeant said quietly, "what happened here?" The officer opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time that night, he had no words. No excuses. No threats, because he knew, deep down, that the truth was already out there, recorded, preserved, waiting to be seen by everyone. The sergeant turned back to Denise. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to wait by my vehicle while we sort this out. You're not under arrest. I just need to review the footage and get statements from everyone." Denise nodded. "I understand, Sergeant. I'll cooperate fully." As she walked toward the sergeant's car, she passed by Officer Holloway. He refused to meet her eyes. His shoulders were slumped. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse, and in many ways the cameras had seen everything. The truth could not be hidden. And for the first time in his career of abusing his power, Derek Holloway was going to face real consequences. Denise did not feel joy about this. She did not feel satisfaction or triumph. She just felt tired. Tired and sad that things like this still happened. Tired that she had been forced to defend herself on a quiet road in her own country. Tired that wearing a uniform and carrying a badge could sometimes mean so little to the people who wore them, but she also felt something else. A small spark of hope. Because tonight the truth had won. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something could change. The video appeared online at 7 in the morning. By noon, it had been viewed 2 million times. By evening, it was everywhere. The man with the pickup truck, whose name was Richard Coleman, had uploaded his footage to social media the night before. He had added a simple caption that read, "I don't know the full story, but this is what I saw tonight. A woman defending herself from a cop who attacked her first. She said she's a Navy SEAL. Watch and decide for yourself." That was all it took? The internet did the rest. Within hours, people had found Denise's dashcam footage as well. The sergeant at the scene had taken the camera as evidence, but not before Denise had quietly made a backup on her phone. She had sent it to her sister, who had sent it to a lawyer friend, who had sent it to a journalist. The full video, from start to finish, was now available for the whole world to see. And what the world saw made them angry. They saw a tired woman in scrubs, being pulled over for no reason. They heard the officer's tone from the very first moment, cold, hostile, looking for trouble. They watched as she stayed calm, kept her hands visible, announced every movement. They watched as she did everything right. And then they watched as the officer grabbed her. They watched as he slapped her across the face. They watched as he tried to hit her again, and they watched as she stopped him. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People shared the video with messages of outrage and support. News stations picked up the story within hours. Reporters scrambled to find out who this woman was. Who was this nurse who had taken down an aggressive officer with moves that looked like something from an action movie? When they found out the truth, the story became even bigger. Denise Walker, former Navy SEAL, one of the first women ever to complete the legendary training program. 3 combat tours, multiple medals for bravery. A hero who had served her country with distinction and then quietly walked away to heal veterans at a hospital. The headlines wrote themselves. Military. Veterans across the country rallied behind her immediately. Forums and social media groups lit up with messages of support. Former soldiers who had served with her shared stories about her character. They talked about her dedication, her courage, her kindness. They said she was the type of person who would give you her last ration if you were hungry. The type who would carry you on her back if you were wounded. Her former commanding officer released a public statement. It said, "Denise Walker is one of the finest individuals I have ever had the privilege of serving with. Her actions that night demonstrated the exact restraint and professionalism that we train our people to have. She is an example of what service truly means." But the most important development was happening behind the scenes. Investigators began looking into the officer who had attacked her. His name was Derek Holloway. He had been on the force for 11 years. And what they found in his record was disturbing. 12 formal complaints. 12 separate incidents where citizens had accused him of using excessive force, making racist comments, or abusing his authority. 12 times people had come forward to say that this man should not be wearing a badge, and 12 times nothing had happened. The complaints had been filed. Then they had been buried, marked as unfounded, dismissed without proper investigation. Someone higher up had been protecting him? Someone had made sure that his record stayed clean even when it was anything but. 3 of those complaints had come from Black motorists who described experiences almost identical to what Denise had faced. Pulled over for no reason. Treated with hostility from the start. Accused of crimes they did not commit. One woman said he had called her a name so ugly she still could not repeat it. One man said Holloway had threatened to plant drugs in his car if he did not show some respect. But their words had not been enough. Without video evidence, without proof that could not be ignored, their complaints had simply disappeared into a filing cabinet somewhere. Now, Finally, their voices were being heard. The investigation expanded. The supervisor who had buried those complaints was identified. A lieutenant named Patterson who had worked with Holloway for years, who had gone to his wedding, who had protected him time and time again because they were friends, because they thought the same way, because they believed the rules did not apply to them. Lieutenant Patterson was placed on administrative leave. Then 3 more officers were suspended as the scope of the misconduct became clear. It was not just one bad cop. It was a system that had allowed bad cops to thrive. News reporters camped outside Denise's apartment building. They called her phone. They messaged her on every platform they could find. Everyone wanted to hear from her. Everyone wanted the exclusive interview with the Navy SEAL nurse who had taken down a corrupt officer for 3 days. Denise said nothing. She stayed inside, away from the cameras, trying to process everything that had happened. She talked to her sister. She talked to her lawyer. She talked to a counselor at the VA who specialized in trauma. She thought about what she wanted to say, what message she wanted to send, whether she even wanted to speak at all. On the 4th day, she agreed to one interview, just one, with a local journalist named Gloria Chun, who had a reputation for being fair and thoughtful. The interview would be broadcast live, with no edits, so that nothing could be twisted or taken out of context. When the camera turned on, Denise was sitting in a simple chair against a plain background. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired, but there was a strength in her eyes that could not be missed. The journalist asked her to describe what happened that night. Denise told the story calmly, without drama or exaggeration. Just the facts. Just the truth. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. Denise, you're a trained warrior. You could have seriously hurt that officer. Some people might say you showed him mercy he didn't deserve. Why did you hold back? Denise was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I spent 8 years learning how to fight, how to hurt people, how to do things that most people could never imagine. But the most important thing I learned in all those years was not how to use violence. It was when to use it. And when not to. She paused, gathering her thoughts. That man on the highway, he wanted me to lose control. He wanted me to give him an excuse. He wanted to turn me into a story about a dangerous black woman attacking a police officer. And I refused to give him that. Her eyes met the camera directly. I didn't fight back to hurt him. I fought back to protect myself. There's a difference. And I think that difference matters. I think it matters a lot. The journalist nodded slowly. What do you hope comes from all of this? Denise took a deep breath. I hope that the other people he hurt finally get justice. I hope that the system that protected him for so long gets fixed. I hope that other officers see this and think twice before they abuse their power. She looked down at her hands for a moment. The same hands that had saved lives in combat. The same hands that had held dying soldiers. The same hands that now cared for veterans at the hospital. But mostly, she said quietly, I hope that someday, a black woman can drive home from work at night without being afraid. I hope that someday a traffic stop is just a traffic stop. I hope that someday we can trust the people who are supposed to protect us. She looked back up at the camera. I'm not angry. I'm just tired. And I want things to be better. For everyone. The interview ended. The screen faded to black dot, and across the country, millions of people who had watched sat in silence, thinking about what they had just heard. Thinking about what kind of world they wanted to live in. Thinking about what they could do to help build it. Something had shifted. Something small but important. A crack in a wall that had stood for too long, and it had all started with one woman who refused to be a victim. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Denise Walker stood at a podium in front of City Hall. The sun was bright. The sky was clear. And hundreds of people had gathered to hear her speak. It had been a long 6 months. Longer than she ever could have imagined. But standing here now, looking out at the crowd, she finally felt like she could breathe again. The legal process had moved faster than anyone expected. With video evidence from 3 different sources and a mountain of prior complaints, There was no way to hide what Derek Holloway had done. No way to spin it. No way to make it disappear like all those other complaints had disappeared. He was fired from the police department within 2 weeks of the incident. The union tried to fight it at first, but even they backed down once the full scope of his history became public. Some battles are not worth fighting. Some people are not worth protecting. The criminal charges came next: assault, civil rights violations, misconduct in office. The prosecutor, a woman named Linda Torres, who had built her career on holding powerful people accountable, made it clear from the start that this case would not be swept under the rug. Derek Holloway pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. Maybe he was advised by his lawyer that a jury would not be kind to him. Maybe he was tired of seeing his face on the news every night. Maybe somewhere deep down he finally understood what he had done. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. It was not as long as some people wanted, but it was something. It was accountability. It was a message that wearing a badge did not put you above the law. Lieutenant Patterson, the supervisor who had buried all those complaints, was also fired. He faced his own charges for obstruction of justice and official misconduct. 2 other officers who had been involved in covering up Holloway's behavior resigned before they could be terminated. The police chief, a man who had been in the job for 15 years, announced his retirement. He said it was time for new leadership, time for fresh ideas, time for change. Most people believed he had been quietly pushed out by city officials, who did not want his name attached to the scandal any longer. A new chief was appointed, a woman named Chief Rosario, who had spent 20 years working her way up through the ranks. She was known for being tough but fair. She was known for actually listening to the communities she served. On her first day in the job, she announced a complete overhaul of how complaints against officers would be handled. No more burying reports. No more protecting friends. Every complaint would be investigated by an independent review board. Every officer would receive mandatory training on de-escalation, bias recognition, and community relations. Body cameras would be required at all times, with severe penalties for anyone who turned them off. It was not a perfect solution. No solution ever is. But it was a start. It was a promise that things would be different going forward. The city offered Denise a settlement. The number had a lot of zeros in it. Enough money to change her life completely. Enough to buy a house, retire early, travel the world, do whatever she wanted. She thought about it for a long time. She talked to her sister, who told her she deserved every penny after what she had been through. She talked to her lawyer, who explained all the options available to her. She talked to her therapist, who reminded her that whatever she decided, she should do it for herself, not for anyone else. In the end, Denise accepted the settlement. But she did not keep most of it. She set up a foundation. She called it the Second Chance Initiative. Its mission was simple: help veterans transition to civilian life, provide legal support for victims of police misconduct, fund scholarships for young people from underserved communities who wanted to pursue careers in law, medicine, or public service. She donated more than half of her settlement to get the foundation started. Then she began raising more, speaking at events, writing articles, reaching out to other veterans and activists who shared her vision. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country, from veterans who had served with her, from strangers who had seen her interview and been moved by her words, from corporations looking to support a cause that actually meant something. Within 3 months, the Second Chance Initiative had helped 47 veterans find jobs. It had provided legal assistance to 12 families dealing with police misconduct cases. It had awarded its first round of scholarships to 15 young people who reminded Denise of herself at that age, hungry, determined, ready to make a difference. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened closer to home. The city council created a new position: Civilian Oversight Coordinator. Someone who would serve as a bridge between the police department and the community. Someone who would make sure that the promises of reform were actually kept. Someone with the credibility, the courage, and the integrity to hold everyone accountable. They asked Denise to take the job. She almost said no. She was tired of being in the spotlight, tired of cameras and interviews and people recognizing her face wherever she went. All she had ever wanted was a quiet life, a chance to heal, a chance to help people without all the noise. But then she thought about the woman who had filed a complaint against Holloway 5 years ago, the one whose words had been ignored, the one who had been told that her story did not matter. Denise had met her during the investigation. Her name was Patricia. She was a school teacher with 2 kids, and she had cried when she found out that someone had finally listened. Denise thought about all the other people out there who had stories like Patricia's, people who had been hurt, people who had been ignored, people who were still waiting for someone to stand up for them, and she said yes. Now, standing at this podium on this beautiful spring morning, Denise looked out at the crowd. She saw veterans in their old uniforms. She saw community activists with signs of support. She saw police officers too, some skeptical, some hopeful. She saw children sitting on their parents' shoulders, watching with wide eyes. She saw a city trying to heal. "I never asked to be here," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted to drive home from work one night without being afraid." She paused, letting the words settle. "But here I am. And since I'm here, I'm going to use this moment for something good. Not for revenge. Not for anger. For change. Real change. The kind that lasts." She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. She did not need them anymore. "I've seen the worst of what people can do to each other. In war, on a quiet highway at night. But I've also seen the best. I've seen strangers stand up for what's right. I've seen a community come together to demand justice. I've seen people who made terrible mistakes actually face consequences for the first time in their lives." Her eyes found a group of young people near the front of the crowd. Students, probably. "The future. That gives me hope. Not blind hope. Not the kind that ignores problems, but real hope. The kind that comes from knowing that change is possible when good people refuse to stay silent." She smiled. A small smile, but a real one. "So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep speaking. Keep working. Keep pushing. Not because I think I have all the answers, but because I know that staying quiet was never really an option." She took a breath. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for believing that we can do better. Because we can. I know we can." The applause started slowly, then grew until it filled the square. Denise stepped back from the podium, her heart full. She thought about that night on the highway. The fear, the anger. The moment when everything changed, and she realized something important. She had not just fought back that night. She had fought forward, toward something better, something worth believing in, and she was just getting started.